What if a single act of kindness could change the course of your life forever? Imagine being so moved by the music of a struggling artist that you hand over your last few dollars without a second thought. It sounds crazy, right? But that's exactly what happened to Sarah, a woman who was down to her last bit of cash and didn't know what the next day would bring. She had no idea that by giving away her final dollar to a musician, she was about to step into a whirlwind that would change her life in ways she never imagined. You might be thinking, how could something like that even happen? What's the connection between giving money to a musician and going on tour? Stay with me for just a few more minutes, because you're about to uncover the shocking twist in this story, and trust me, you're not going to want to miss what happens next. Let's take a step back for a moment. We all know life is unpredictable. One day, you're just living your routine, trying to make ends meet, and the next moment, something unexpected turns everything upside down. That's exactly what Sarah was feeling that day. She was broke, tired, and unsure about the future. Her life, just like so many of ours, was filled with small struggles and ordinary moments. She was sitting in a cafe, sipping the last of her iced coffee, when the music began to play. A street musician set up shop right outside the window, his guitar slung over his shoulder, a battered case at his feet. You know the type, the ones who don't have a stage or a spotlight, just the raw talent and passion to pour into the world, hoping someone notices. The moment he started to play, Sarah felt something shift inside her. It wasn't just the music, it was the way he played, with all the emotion of someone who had nothing but this moment. His performance spoke directly to her heart. Sarah didn't have much, not in terms of money, but what she did have was a soul open to connection, and that moment felt like the universe had orchestrated the perfect timing. She was moved, deeply moved, by his music and the vulnerability he shared in each note. So, without thinking about the consequences, without a second thought about how she would pay for her groceries or bills later that week, she reached into her purse and gave him her last cash. It was a small amount, but to her, it was all she had left. She smiled, handed him the crumpled bills, and walked away, thinking that maybe, just maybe, she had made a difference in his day. But then came the unexpected. This musician, who had just received the last of her cash, looked up at her with wide eyes, clearly stunned by the gesture. It wasn't just the money, it was the connection. And what happened next would send shockwaves through Sarah's world in a way she never saw coming. With a calm but excited voice, he called out to her. He asked her to come closer, to wait just a moment. She hesitated, unsure of what to expect. After all, who wouldn't? You give someone money, but what could possibly come next? Was he going to thank her? Ask for more? But no, what he said next would change the entire trajectory of her life. He invited her on tour. Yes, you heard that right. This musician, whose name was Jason, looked at Sarah and, without hesitation, asked her if she wanted to join him on his tour. The same tour that was barely more than a pipe dream for him up until that moment. The same tour he had been hustling for, struggling to make connections, to get a break in the industry. And now, here he was, standing before her, offering her an opportunity that most people only dream of. A life of music, travel, adventure, and new experiences, all because she gave him her last few dollars. It's easy to dismiss this as a fluke, right? Maybe he was just feeling grateful, or maybe it was just one of those strange coincidences that make for great stories. But trust me, this was no coincidence. The story of Sarah and Jason wasn't about luck, it was about the ripple effect of kindness, the power of human connection, and the unexpected paths life sometimes leads us down when we least expect it. At first, Sarah thought he was joking. It sounded too good to be true. Who would ask a stranger, someone they had just met for a few minutes, to join them on tour? It felt absurd. But as the days went by and she reflected on that one, fateful moment, the pieces began to fall into place. She had been struggling herself, yes, but she had also been longing for something more. She needed a change, a break from the monotonous, predictable life she had been living. And Jason, with his passion and raw talent, represented everything she was yearning for: freedom, adventure, and a chance to do something different. But there was a catch. Of course, there always is, isn't there? Jason was not a big name, not by a long shot. He wasn't an established artist with a massive fan base. In fact, He was still trying to break into the industry, scraping by from gig to gig, hoping to make it big. That's where Sarah's role came in. He needed someone who could help, someone who would be willing to take a leap of faith with him. But would Sarah be that person? Would she have the courage to walk away from everything she knew and step into a completely unknown future? As you're probably wondering, the choice wasn't as simple as it seemed. On one hand, Sarah had her family, her job, and a life that was comfortable, though perhaps a little too predictable. On the other hand, she had the opportunity to join someone who might change everything for her, to leave behind everything and chase a dream that was as risky as it was exciting. But she had no idea just how much this decision would alter her life. This wasn't just about touring with a musician, it was about discovering herself, about stepping into the unknown and realizing that sometimes, life doesn't hand you opportunities in neat little boxes. Sometimes, you have to grab them when they come your way, no matter how impossible they may seem. What Sarah didn't know, and what you will soon find out, is that this tour would become more than just a musical journey. It would lead her to new friendships, to life-changing experiences, and to a personal transformation she could never have anticipated. But there were also challenges, obstacles that neither she nor Jason could have predicted. And as they traveled from city to city, performing in small clubs and hoping to make a name for themselves, they would face moments that tested their resolve, their courage, and their trust in one another. But before we go any further, I want you to stop for a moment and think, what would you have done in Sarah's position? Would you have taken the leap? Or would you have stayed in the safety of your routine, afraid to step into the unknown? Think about that, because the answer isn't as easy as it seems. Sarah's journey is about to unfold in ways that will challenge everything she thought she knew about herself, and you're going to want to be here for every twist and turn. Stick with me, because in just a few moments, I'm going to share the rest of Sarah's story. What happens next will surprise you, inspire you, and maybe even make you question your own choices in life. So stay tuned, because the ride is just getting started, and trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. Are you ready for the rest of the story? Because I promise, what happens next will leave you speechless. Keep watching. She wasn't going to jump into this blindly. She would ask the tough questions, push him for answers, demand the truth. She needed to know more, and the only way to do that was to confront him head-on. But when she arrived, the cafe was unusually quiet. Jason was already there, sitting at a corner table with his back to her. As she walked over, she noticed something odd. His bag, which he always carried with him, was slightly open. For a brief moment, she caught sight of something inside, something shiny, metallic. Was it a phone? A notebook? She couldn't be sure, but the way he quickly closed the bag as she approached made her heart skip a beat. It was as if he had been hiding something, and the moment she arrived, he knew she had seen it. "Hey, Sarah," Jason said, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Glad you could make it." His voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension that she hadn't noticed before. She sat down, trying to ignore the unease creeping up her spine. He had been distant on the phone, but now there was something in his demeanor that made her feel like he was hiding something. Was he nervous? Or was it just the weight of the situation finally catching up with him? They exchanged pleasantries, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As they talked, she noticed his gaze flickering toward the door every now and then, as if he was expecting someone, or worse, trying to avoid someone. It didn't make sense. This was supposed to be about her joining the band on tour, wasn't it? But it felt like they were dancing around the real conversation, both of them tiptoeing around something they weren't ready to confront. Just as she was about to ask him about the strange message from Mark, a figure appeared at the door, stepping inside with a confident, almost predatory air. It was Caleb. He didn't even glance in her direction at first, his eyes locked on Jason, who immediately stiffened when he saw him. Caleb made his way over to the counter, but not before shooting a glance at Sarah, one that made her skin crawl. It was the same look he had given her at the concert, that quiet, knowing stare. Sarah couldn't understand it. What was Caleb's role in all of this? Why was he always around, lurking in the background, and what was his connection to Jason? Jason, trying to mask his discomfort, quickly changed the subject, talking about upcoming gigs and the logistics of the tour. But Sarah couldn't focus on that. Her mind was racing, piecing together the strange series of events. There was something Jason wasn't telling her, and Caleb's sudden appearance only heightened her suspicions. As if the situation wasn't confusing enough, just as Sarah decided to confront Jason about the missing details and her growing unease, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, expecting a message from a friend or family member, but instead, it was an email with the subject line, "You need to stop digging into Jason's past." The message was from an anonymous account, the contents brief and chilling. "The deeper you go, the more dangerous it becomes. Let it go, or you won't get out alive." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she read the message over and over. Who had sent this? Was it a warning from someone close to Jason? Or was it just a prank, designed to mess with her head? But it didn't feel like a joke. It felt too real, too personal. Sarah's thoughts were interrupted by Jason's voice, which suddenly sounded distant, as though he were speaking from far away. He was talking about the band's upcoming shows, but his words blurred together as she tried to process what had just happened. This wasn't just about a tour anymore. It was about something much bigger, something darker that she couldn't see yet, but could feel closing in on her. And then it happened. In the middle of their conversation, as Jason reached for his bag, it slipped off the table and onto the floor with a loud crash. The bag opened again, and this time, Sarah saw it clearly, a small, leather-bound journal with a red symbol embossed on the cover. It was almost imperceptible, but it was there. The symbol was something familiar, but she couldn't place it. Her heart skipped a beat. Before she could say anything, Jason was already on his feet, hastily stuffing the journal back into the bag with a look of pure panic on his face. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice shaky. I didn't mean for you to see that." But it was too late. Sarah knew something was going on, and whatever it wasn't something Jason wanted her to know. The tension in the room had shifted, and for the first time, Sarah felt a deep, gnawing sense of danger. What was Jason hiding? And more importantly, who could she trust in a situation that was quickly spiraling out of control? As Jason tried to recover, Sarah's mind raced, her instincts screaming at her to get out, to stop digging into a past that was determined to stay buried. But she couldn't walk away now. Not after everything she had seen. Not after the warning. She needed answers, and she was going to get them, no matter how deep she had to go. The question was she already in too deep to get out? And what would happen when the truth finally came to light? As Sarah sat there, trying to process the frantic look on Jason's face and the cryptic message from the anonymous sender, her mind was racing with 100 questions, none of which had any clear answers. She had thought, for a brief moment, that she was close to uncovering the truth behind Jason's mysterious offer, but the journal, the symbol, and the weird sense of urgency in his eyes only made the whole situation more confusing. What was this symbol? Why had Jason reacted so strongly when she saw it? And why, when she thought she had everything figured out, did everything suddenly feel like it was slipping further out of her grasp? It wasn't until she left the cafe that things took a bizarre turn. As she walked down the sidewalk, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from her best friend, Katie, who lived across town. Katie had been the one person Sarah confided in when the whole tour offer thing first came up. She was the one who told Sarah to take a leap and embrace the opportunity, even though they both knew how uncharacteristic that was for Sarah. But now, the message Katie sent wasn't the supportive, cheerful message Sarah expected. Instead, it was unsettling, a brief but cryptic text that read, "I just got a message too. Same warning. Same threats. Sarah, I think we're both in danger. Be careful." Sarah's stomach dropped. What did Katie mean by that? Was someone targeting her friend as well? The idea that Katie, of all people, might be caught up in something this twisted sent a wave of panic through Sarah. She quickly called her hands trembling as she held the phone to her ear. After a few rings, Katie answered, but her voice was low, almost strained. "Sarah, I don't know what's going on, but I think you need to stop. This thing with Jason, it's not what you think. I've been getting messages, and I've seen things that don't add up. You're being watched." Katie's words were rushed, as if she were afraid of someone overhearing. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Her best friend was now involved in this mess. How was that possible? Wait, What do you mean you've seen things? Sarah demanded, her voice shaky but trying to stay calm. Unable to sit still, Sarah jumped to her feet, pacing in the small apartment. What had she gotten herself into? The paranoia that had been building over the past few weeks now felt like a thick fog, clouding her thoughts. What if Jason was the key to everything? What if he had been playing her from the beginning? Her mind flashed back to the moments she'd shared with him, the times when he'd seemed genuine, open, and kind. But now, it felt like every word, every glance had been part of a carefully constructed lie. Her phone rang, snapping her out of her spiral. It was a local number she didn't recognize, but she answered it anyway, heart pounding in her chest. Hello. There was a long pause before a voice, cold and steady, responded. You don't know me, but you need to listen closely. The voice was disguised, altered somehow, but it was unmistakably male. Your friend, Katie. She's not where she's supposed to be. Sarah's blood ran cold. What do you mean? She whispered, barely able to hold herself together. The voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm, as if he had been expecting her reaction. She's gone. Disappeared. Don't waste your time looking for her. And don't bother calling the police. They won't find her. The line clicked off abruptly, leaving Sarah staring at her phone in stunned silence. Katie was gone. Just like that. In a matter of hours, someone had taken her, and she had no idea who or why. The gravity of the situation hit her like a freight train. Katie had warned her, but Sarah hadn't listened. Now her friend was missing, and Sarah was left with nothing but questions. What did this mean? Was this related to Jason, to the band, or to the mysterious forces that had been threatening them from the shadows? Suddenly, all of the pieces began to fall into place: Katie's warning, the messages, the threats, the strange behaviors, the lurking figures. It was all connected. But the more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized that she wasn't just in danger from the people who were after her. She was also in danger from herself. If she couldn't figure out who was behind this, if she couldn't uncover the truth, she was going to lose everything. Her life. Her freedom. The safety of the people she cared about. The room began to feel smaller, suffocating, as though the walls were closing in around her. She stumbled back to the window, pulling the blinds aside to look outside again. The street was still empty, but something told her that the danger wasn't just lurking outside, it was already inside, creeping closer with every passing moment. Katie's disappearance was just the beginning. Something darker was on the horizon. And Sarah had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went or how long she had before it swallowed her whole. She grabbed her coat and bolted for the door, her heart hammering in her chest. She had to do something. She couldn't sit idly by while someone, or something, picked apart her life piece by piece. But as she stepped out into the night, her phone buzzed again, this time with a new message from Jason. It read simply, "You should have stayed away, Sarah. Now there's no turning back." For the first time since this whole nightmare began, Sarah felt a cold, overwhelming sense of dread. There was no escaping this anymore. She had been dragged into something much larger than herself, and the deeper she dug, the more she realized that no matter where she turned, the truth would always be just out of reach, buried beneath layers of lies, deceit, and danger. And as she hurried down the empty street, feeling the weight of her growing paranoia close in on her, Sarah knew one thing for certain. Whatever had happened to Katie, whatever was coming for her, it wasn't going to stop until she uncovered the truth. But what would that truth cost her? And who would she lose before it was all over? The night air was thick with unease as Sarah moved through the dimly lit streets, her thoughts swirling with the terrifying possibility that Katie was gone for good. Each step felt like a trap, each shadow on the sidewalk a potential threat lurking just out of sight. She couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was behind this had planned every move with precision, one step ahead, always watching. She had been careful, hadn't she? She had trusted her instincts, tried to keep her distance from the chaos. But now, with Katie gone, her only remaining anchor in this madness, Sarah felt more alone than ever. Just as she passed an alleyway, she heard footsteps behind her. Quick, deliberate, but not in a hurry. A sharp, cold shiver ran down her spine as she glanced over her shoulder. There, standing at the end of the alley, was Jason. His face was illuminated by the soft glow of a nearby streetlight, but there was no warmth in his expression, no kindness in his eyes. The man who had once seemed like an ally, someone she could trust, was now standing in front of her like a stranger. No, worse than a stranger, someone who knew exactly what she was thinking, exactly what she was about to do. "Jason," Sarah said, her voice barely more than a whisper. She was trying to make sense of everything, trying to piece together the fragments of a puzzle she couldn't solve. Her heart raced, but there was something in his eyes, something dark, that kept her frozen in place. "What do you know about Katie? Where is she? What happened to her?" Jason didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step toward her, his pace slow, almost as if he were savoring the moment. "You've been asking all the wrong questions, Sarah," he said, his voice low and calm, but there was a strange coldness in it, like a knife hidden beneath silk. "Everything you think you know is wrong." Her stomach twisted. "What do you mean? What's going on? Why are you involved in all of this?" The questions spilled out in a torrent, each one more desperate than the last. Jason looked at her for a long moment, his gaze intense, calculating. Then, without warning, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, handing it to her without saying a word. Confused, Sarah took the paper, her hands trembling as she unfolded it. What she saw on the page made her breath catch in her throat. It was a photo. A photo of her, standing in the cafe, only this time there were other figures in the background she hadn't noticed before. The blurry faces of men who seemed strangely familiar, even though she had never seen them in her life. And beneath the photo, written in jagged, hurried handwriting, were two words that made her blood run cold: "She's watching." Sarah's eyes darted back to Jason, her mind scrambling to make sense of what was happening. "What is this? What's going on?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady despite the growing panic in her chest. Jason's expression darkened as he stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. "You were never meant to see this. The truth was supposed to stay buried. But now that you've seen it, now that you've gotten too close, there's no turning back. Not for you, not for Katie. You both became part of something bigger than you'll ever understand." Sarah's mind reeled. The truth was supposed to stay buried? What did he mean by that? This wasn't just about a street musician, a small-time band, or a simple tour offer. She had known it was more complicated than that from the beginning, but now it felt like she had stumbled into something far darker, something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Her eyes scanned Jason's face, searching for any sign of sincerity, but all she saw was a cold, distant look, a look that told her everything she thought she knew was about to be shattered. Before she could ask another question, Jason spoke again, his voice laced with finality. "You were looking in the wrong places. You thought Katie was your friend, but she's not. She's been part of this from the very beginning." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Her heart seemed to stop, and for a moment, the world around her blurred. Katie? No, that couldn't be true. Katie had been her closest friend, the person who had been there through everything, the late-night phone calls, the support when Sarah had started to get closer to Jason, the warning to stay away. How could it be possible that Katie, the one person she trusted the most, was somehow involved in this twisted web? Jason's next words were like a final blow. "You were just a pawn, Sarah. Both of you. Katie, me, the band, it was all a setup. You were never meant to make it this far." He leaned in, his eyes locking with hers. "And now, they're coming for you. They know everything. They always have." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Who? Who's coming for me?" Her voice was shaking, but the fear in her chest was growing unbearable. She had to know. Jason's lips curled into a cruel, almost pitying smile. "The people who have been watching you from the start. The ones who never wanted you to find out the truth. And trust me, you'll wish you hadn't." He turned, beginning to walk away, but paused just before disappearing into the shadows. "You'll find out soon enough. Just remember this, nothing is what it seems. Not even me." For a moment, Sarah stood frozen in the middle of the street, the weight of his words crushing her. Her mind raced as she tried to process everything. Jason wasn't who he had seemed. Katie wasn't who she had seemed. Nothing about this was what it appeared to be. She had been played, manipulated, but by who? And why? With every passing second, The walls around her seemed to close in tighter. The photo in her hand, the words she's watching, echoed in her mind, over and over again. Was this all part of some elaborate plan? Or was there someone else, someone more powerful, more dangerous, pulling the strings? The world she had known was slipping away, and the truth was like an elusive shadow, just beyond her reach. In that moment, Sarah realized with terrifying clarity that she was in way over her head. Whatever was happening, whatever dark forces had been pulling the strings, she was only beginning to scratch the surface. And now, with Jason gone and Katie's betrayal hanging over her like a dark cloud, Sarah knew one thing for sure: there was no turning back. The game had changed. And the people watching her had only just begun to play. Sarah barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind raced, replaying Jason's words over and over again. Nothing is what it seems. You were just a pawn. Her heart thudded in her chest as she tried to shake the thoughts. The weight of the betrayal she'd just witnessed was overwhelming. She had trusted Jason. She had trusted Katie. But now everything felt like a carefully constructed lie, built to manipulate her, to pull her into a world she had no control over. She had been part of a game she hadn't even known existed. The worst part was, she still didn't know who was pulling the strings, or why. Her phone buzzed, cutting through the thick silence of the apartment. The text notification read simply, "We need to talk. Now." It was from Katie. A wave of conflicting emotions hit Sarah all at once: relief, anger, fear. Could it be possible that Katie wasn't fully involved in whatever Jason had dragged her into? Could she be reaching out for help? Or was this just another attempt to manipulate her into trusting someone who had betrayed her before? Sarah felt like she was drowning in questions with no answers. Her fingers hovered over the phone, torn between the desire to know the truth and the fear that she might be walking right into a trap. She paced back and forth, trying to make sense of the situation. The logical part of her mind told her to stay away, to not fall for whatever Katie's plan was, but the emotional side, the side that remembered their late-night talks, their shared secrets, urged her to reach out. What if Katie was still in danger, too? What if she had been forced into this just like Sarah had? But the truth was, she didn't trust anyone anymore. Not Jason. Not Katie. Maybe not even herself. She had been thrown into this whirlwind of lies and half-truths, and each time she took a step closer to the answers, it only seemed to pull her further into the darkness. Then, her phone buzzed again. Another text from Katie: "I'm at the old diner on 3rd. Please come." The message sent a chill down her spine. The old diner. The one on the edge of town that had been abandoned for years, now nothing but a rotting shell of what it once was. Sarah had heard rumors about it, stories of shady deals and disappearances that had gone unnoticed by the public, a place that seemed to attract the wrong kind of people. It felt like a trap, but the temptation to confront Katie was stronger than the fear that gripped her. With her heart pounding in her ears, Sarah grabbed her jacket and left her apartment, stepping into the night once more. Every step felt like a decision she was making in slow motion, each one heavier than the last. Her mind kept running through the possibilities, her thoughts colliding in a chaotic mess. What if this was a chance to get answers? What if Katie could explain everything, reveal the secrets she'd been hiding? But what if it was just another layer in a web of deception, another twist that would leave Sarah more vulnerable than before? The diner came into view as Sarah rounded the corner. The flickering neon sign barely lit the dusty street, and the building itself seemed almost haunted, its windows dark and empty. She felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. This place felt wrong. But she had come this far, and there was no turning back now. As she pushed open the door to the diner, a musty, stale air greeted her. The smell of old coffee and mold lingered in the corners. The interior was just as abandoned as the outside: dirty booths, cracked tiles, and faded menus on the walls that hadn't been touched in years. Sarah's breath caught as her eyes scanned the room, but there was no sign of Katie. "Sarah." The voice came from behind her, low and steady. Sarah spun around, her heart racing in her chest. Katie stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She was different. There was something about her that felt off. Katie's eyes searched Sarah's face, and for a moment, the two women stood in silence, neither knowing what to say. Then, slowly, Katie walked toward her. I know you're angry, she said quietly, and you have every right to be. But you have to understand, I didn't have a choice. Sarah's pulse quickened, but she didn't trust her own words. You didn't have a choice? Katie, what are you talking about? You've been lying to me from the start. You warned me about Jason, but now he's saying you've been part of this all along. What is going on? Katie's face hardened, and she took a step closer, lowering her voice. I'm not part of this, at least, not the way you think. But you're in way over your head, Sarah. Everything you've uncovered so far? It's only the beginning. And the people who've been watching you, they've been watching me, too. Who are they? Sarah's voice trembled with frustration. What do they want from us? Katie looked down, as if weighing the words she was about to say. They want the information you're digging for, the truth. And they're willing to do anything to keep it buried. But Sarah, I don't have the answers you think I do. I'm just as lost in this as you are. All I can tell you is, you're in danger. Both of us are. A cold chill ran through Sarah as Katie's words hit home. She had been right all along to feel like something wasn't adding up. But now, as she stood in front of Katie, with everything on the line, she was faced with a decision she hadn't anticipated. Katie was involved in this mess, she admitted it. But now, there was a choice to make. Did Sarah keep pushing forward, trusting that there was more to the story than Katie was letting on? Or did she walk away, knowing that walking away might mean leaving the truth buried forever, leaving Katie and possibly herself vulnerable to whatever was lurking in the shadows? Before Sarah could respond, a loud crash echoed through the diner, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, fast and heavy, closing in on them. Someone was coming. Katie grabbed Sarah's arm, her grip tight with urgency. We have to leave. Now. As Sarah turned to run, her mind exploded with questions and fear. Who had just entered the diner? What did they want from her? Katie was right, Sarah had been dragged into something far deeper than she had ever imagined. She wasn't just searching for answers anymore. She was fighting for her life. But the hardest question of all remained unanswered. Was she running toward the truth, or was she running away from the people who had the power to destroy everything she cared about? The room felt like it was closing in on her, and there was nowhere to go but forward. But as Sarah and Katie moved toward the back door, Sarah felt a strange weight on her chest, an overwhelming sense that there were no right choices left to make. Whatever happened next, the world she had known was gone forever. And the clock was ticking. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she and Katie sprinted through the back alley behind the diner, their footsteps echoing off the graffiti-covered walls. The sounds of pursuit were growing closer, the heavy, deliberate thud of boots against the ground. They were being hunted, and Sarah was beginning to realize just how far-reaching this nightmare was. What had started as a strange encounter with a musician, a friendly offer to go on tour, had now turned into a deadly game of cat and mouse, one where the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. She had been drawn into something that wasn't just about her or Katie anymore. It was bigger, much bigger, and they were both trapped in the middle of it. Katie was ahead of her, pulling her along through the shadows of the alley, but Sarah was starting to slow down. Her mind was racing, every thought twisted and disjointed. Who were these people? Who had been watching them, manipulating them for months? She couldn't shake the image of Jason's cold expression, the cruel finality in his voice. You were just a pawn. Were they truly the only ones being targeted, or was this part of something far more insidious? Come on, Sarah. Katie called over her shoulder, her voice a mixture of urgency and fear. We don't have time. But Sarah didn't respond. Her mind was already 1,000 steps ahead, trying to make sense of everything. Katie was running, yes, but why? Was she truly trying to save them both, or was there something more she wasn't telling Sarah? Was there a hidden agenda behind her every move? And then it hit her. A flash of realization so powerful, it almost stopped her in her tracks. Was Katie playing both sides? It was all starting to make sense now. Katie had been in on this from the beginning. She had been the one to introduce Sarah to Jason, to the band, to the whole mess. And now she was dragging Sarah into an alley, into a dead end where escape seemed impossible. Wait, Sarah shouted, pulling her arm away from Katie's grip. Katie stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes wide with a mix of confusion and frustration. "What are you talking about?" Katie hissed, her voice low but panicked. "We have to keep moving. We don't have much time." But Sarah couldn't hold back anymore. The doubts, the questions, they had built up to a breaking point. "You knew all along, didn't you?" Sarah's voice trembled, but there was no turning back now. "You knew exactly what this was. You've been playing me, haven't you?" Katie's face went pale, and for the briefest moment, Sarah saw something in her eyes, something like fear, maybe even guilt, but then it vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "Sarah, please, you don't understand," Katie said quickly, her voice shaking but desperate. "I was trying to protect you. I thought if we just played along, we could get out of this clean. But now it's too late. They know everything. They know about you." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. "They know about you." What did that even mean? Katie's admission that she had been trying to protect Sarah felt like a lie, like a last-ditch attempt to salvage whatever trust she had left. But none of it made sense. If Katie had truly been trying to protect her, why hadn't she told Sarah the truth sooner? Why drag her deeper into this dangerous world instead of pulling her out? "Who are they, Katie?" Sarah demanded, stepping forward, her chest tightening with the weight of the realization. "Who the hell are these people? What do they want from us?" Katie swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously as she scanned the alley around them. "I don't know exactly," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But they've been tracking us for a long time. Jason, the band, they're all part of this. There's a whole network, a syndicate of sorts. It's about information, control, power." Sarah felt a chill run through her. A syndicate. Power. None of this felt real anymore, but the way Katie spoke, the way she looked over her shoulder as if expecting someone to jump out of the shadows, it was clear that Sarah wasn't just in danger of being caught up in something messy. This was bigger than her. This was a web that stretched out across the city, maybe even beyond it. There were forces at play that didn't care about her or Katie as individuals, they cared about control, about silence. Before Sarah could ask more, a sudden flash of movement caught her eye. A black van pulled into the alley, its headlights cutting through the darkness like an approaching storm. The doors of the van slid open with a sharp metallic sound, and two men stepped out. They were tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in dark suits that looked out of place in a rundown alley at this hour. But their cold, calculated expressions made it clear they weren't here for a casual chat. They were here for Sarah and Katie. The men didn't say a word as they moved swiftly toward them, their eyes locked on the two women. Katie grabbed Sarah's arm, her grip now tight and full of desperation. "We have to go, now," she hissed, her voice cracking with panic. But it was too late. From behind them, another figure appeared, Jason. His silhouette was barely visible in the shadows, but there was no mistaking the presence of the man who had started this whole mess. Sarah's pulse spiked, her throat tightening with the sharp sting of betrayal. How had he found them? Was he with them? Was he part of the syndicate too? Jason stepped into the alley, his face expressionless. "It's over, Sarah," he said simply, as if the words didn't carry the weight of a death sentence. "You don't have a choice anymore." Sarah's breath caught in her chest, her heart hammering. Everything she thought she knew was unraveling right in front of her eyes. Jason wasn't here to help. Katie wasn't here to help. They had all been pieces on the same board, and now the game had turned. They weren't in control. They were pawns, and the people chasing them had the power to move them however they pleased. Katie's hand was still gripping Sarah's arm, her knuckles white with the force of it. "You have to listen to me," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "They're going to kill us if we don't do what they say. Please, we have to make a deal." A deal? What kind of deal could they possibly make with people like this? As Jason took a step closer, Sarah's thoughts raced. The men in the suits, Jason, Katie, none of them were on her side. The truth she had been chasing had become a nightmare she could barely comprehend, and now she was faced with a decision that could cost her everything. She had been dragged into a conspiracy larger than she ever imagined, and now it was time to choose. Fight back, knowing it might be futile, or give in, but at what cost? The urgency of the moment weighed heavy on her chest, and the cold realization hit her: there was no escape. They were surrounded by people who didn't just want to silence them. They wanted to control them. And as the men in the suits closed in, Sarah realized that whatever deal was about to be made would come at a price higher than she could ever imagine. The alley felt suffocating, the air thick with tension as Sarah's pulse hammered in her ears. Jason was standing just a few feet away, his cold eyes locked on hers, and the men in dark suits were moving closer with every breath she took. Her heart was racing, her mind spinning in a chaotic whirl of confusion, betrayal, and fear. This was the moment she'd been running from, the confrontation she never thought would come, but now that it was here, everything felt like it was happening in slow motion. She wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but her body was frozen in place, paralyzed by the weight of the truth she had only just started to understand. Jason's voice broke through her thoughts, low and steady, carrying the weight of everything that had happened between them. "You don't get it, do you, Sarah?" he said, his words slow, deliberate. "This was never about you or me. This is bigger than you could ever imagine. You were always just a part of the plan." Her breath caught in her throat as the meaning of his words settled over her like a blanket of ice. "A part of the plan? What the hell are you talking about?" Her voice was barely a whisper, her throat tight with disbelief. Jason's lips twitched into a humorless smile, his gaze flicking toward the men in the suits before returning to her. "This whole thing, everything you thought you knew, the band, the tour, none of it was real. It was all a cover, a distraction. You think the music industry is just about talent and fame? You think it's just about songs and fans? No, Sarah. It's about control. Power. The information we've been collecting, the people we've been manipulating, it's all part of a much larger game." Her mind reeled. She had been so sure she was getting closer to the truth. Each step forward had led her to deeper layers of deception, but now everything she'd uncovered felt like it had been orchestrated from the very beginning. All the lies. All the betrayal. It had all been leading to this. "Why me, Jason?" Sarah choked out, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and hurt. "Why drag me into this? I'm just a nobody. I'm not part of whatever sick game you're playing. I never signed up for this." Jason's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing. "Because you're not just a nobody, Sarah. You're smarter than you think. You've been digging into things no one else has dared to touch. You've been asking questions, uncovering pieces of a puzzle that could bring down everything we've worked for. You're dangerous." Her breath caught, her mind flashing back to all the moments where things didn't quite add up. The strange coincidences. The cryptic messages. The nagging feeling that something wasn't right. And now, here she was, standing at the heart of it all, facing the man who had played her from the start. But just as she opened her mouth to respond, there was a sudden, sharp noise behind her, a sound of something heavy hitting the ground. Sarah spun around, her heart leaping into her throat, her pulse racing with dread. Katie was on the ground, her body crumpled in an unnatural way, her face pale and blooded. The sight made Sarah's stomach twist in horror. "No!" Sarah screamed, rushing toward her, but the two men in suits immediately stepped in her way, blocking her path. One of them grabbed her by the arm, twisting it behind her back with a force that made her gasp in pain. "Katie!" Sarah shouted again, desperation in her voice. But there was no response. Katie lay motionless, her body lifeless, and in that moment, Sarah realized the truth that she had refused to accept. Katie wasn't just a pawn in this game. She was a casualty, someone who had been sacrificed for whatever dark plans were unfolding around her. Jason stepped closer, his expression unreadable as he watched Sarah struggle against the men's grip. "It's over, Sarah. You should have stayed out of it. Now you've seen too much. You're too deep. And that's why we can't let you go." His words hung in the air like a death sentence, and Sarah's mind scrambled for an escape, for a way out, but the reality was sinking in with brutal clarity. There was no escape. No easy way out. The game was over, and she had lost. But then, just as Sarah's world seemed to collapse around her, a voice rang out from the shadows, sharp, authoritative, and commanding. "That's where you're wrong." The voice wasn't Jason's. It wasn't one of the men in suits. It was familiar, deep, and cold with the weight of someone who had been in control for a very long time. Sarah whipped around, her breath catching as she saw the figure step into the dim light of the alley. It was someone she hadn't expected. Someone she thought she could trust. It was her father. What are you doing here?" Sarah stammered, her mind struggling to process the sight before her. Her father, a man she had believed to be out of her life for good, standing there, watching her with cold, calculating eyes. Jason's face twisted into a smile, like a predator finally cornering its prey. "I was wondering when he'd show up." Sarah's head was spinning. Her father. Here. After everything, after all the lies she'd uncovered. It didn't make sense. He'd always been distant, a shadow in her life, but she never could have imagined he was involved in something like this. And yet, here he was, standing at the center of it all. "You never told her, did you?" Jason's voice was laced with amusement, but there was something darker beneath it. "You never told your daughter the truth about what you were really doing. About the network you helped build. The power you wielded behind the scenes. About how your little girl has been a target from the very beginning." Sarah's mind exploded with realization, each word sinking in with horrifying clarity. Her father had been a part of this conspiracy all along. He had known. He had been playing her just like everyone else. The secrets. The lies. The manipulations, it was all part of a much bigger plan, and she had been too blind to see it. Her father stepped forward, his expression unreadable, but his voice was steady. "It's time you understood, Sarah. Everything you've seen, everything you've uncovered, it was meant to lead you here. To this moment. To the truth. You were never meant to be a victim. You were always meant to be a player." The ground beneath Sarah's feet seemed to tilt, her head spinning. "You've been using me. All along." Her father didn't respond. His cold gaze said everything she needed to know. Jason stepped in closer, his smile widening as he finally addressed her directly. "You weren't just caught in the middle, Sarah. You were always the one who was supposed to figure it out. You were always the key." But just as everything was coming to a head, just as Sarah thought the world around her was crumbling entirely, something else happened, something that shifted the entire narrative. The man who had been watching her from the shadows, the one who had been orchestrating everything from behind the scenes, finally stepped into the light. And with him, the final twist that would change everything. It was someone Sarah had never expected. It was a message from an unknown number. With trembling hands, she opened it, her breath catching when she saw the words, "You've been warned. Stay away from Jason and his band, or it'll be the last mistake you ever make." A chill ran through her as she read the message over and over. She knew deep down that this was no joke. The stakes were real, and they were only getting higher. She had already been pushed to the edge by the cryptic warnings and the unsettling presence around her, but this was something else. Someone, whether it was connected to Jason or not, had made it clear that they didn't want her digging into the truth. The message wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war. Her mother, who had disappeared years ago, was standing before her, holding a gun, her expression cold, calculating. And in that moment, Sarah realized with sickening clarity, the game wasn't over yet. It had only just begun. The alley was eerily quiet now. The chaos of the past moments had settled into an unsettling silence, each breath Sarah took seeming to reverberate through the stillness, each heartbeat a reminder of how far she had come and how far she had yet to go. Her mother, standing in front of her with the gun in hand, her face a mask of cold detachment, was everything Sarah had been afraid of. She had spent years mourning the loss of her mother, believing she was gone, only to find that the woman who had abandoned her was standing here, orchestrating the chaos that had nearly torn her apart. The realization hit like a ton of bricks. This was never just about the music, about the band, or even about the mysterious figures chasing them. This had always been about control, about a family caught in a web of power and secrets that ran far deeper than Sarah could have ever imagined. She had spent so long uncovering the lies, only to find that the biggest lie was the one that had been woven into the fabric of her own life. Her mother had been a part of it all along, pulling the strings, playing her role in a game that Sarah was never meant to understand. But now, standing in the shadows of everything she thought she knew, Sarah realized something else. This wasn't the end. This was just another twist in a story that was far from over. As her mother's eyes met hers, there was no warmth, No trace of the woman who had once held her as a child, whispered lullabies in her ear. There was nothing but cold calculation. "You think this is the end, don't you?" Her mother's voice was low, almost amused, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "But it's not. This is just the beginning of your real journey. The one you were always meant to take." The gun remained steady in her hand, but Sarah could feel the weight of those words pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. For so long, she had been trying to put the pieces together, to solve the puzzle that had been her life. But now, staring at the woman who had set it all in motion, Sarah understood that there was no resolution. Not yet. Her mother's actions, the people involved in this dark network, were just the tip of an iceberg that stretched beyond what Sarah could comprehend. There were more players, more secrets, more lies buried deeper than she had ever imagined. But before Sarah could respond, before she could ask the questions that burned in her throat, her father stepped forward, his expression a mask of regret and determination. "You have to trust me, Sarah," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Everything I did for you. I didn't want to bring you into this world, but now it's too late. They won't stop until they have everything, and you're the key." Sarah felt the weight of his words crash over her, the past and present colliding in an overwhelming rush of confusion and betrayal. Her father, the man she had always wanted answers from, was as tangled in this web as her mother. But now, it was clear, there was no clean way out. There was only survival and understanding. As her father's words lingered in the air, something shifted inside Sarah. She could feel the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Her mother, her father, Jason, the syndicate, it was all part of something far bigger, something global. There were forces at play that no one could stop. But there was one thing Sarah knew for certain: she could stop running. She could no longer be the victim. It was time to take control, to face the truth, no matter how ugly it was. With that decision came clarity, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah felt a spark of hope, however faint it might be. She wasn't alone in this fight. Katie, though lost in her own way, was still out there. The people she had trusted, the people she had fought against, they all played a part in the larger scheme. But now, Sarah could see them for what they were, not just pawns, but part of a much greater game. The game was changing, and Sarah was no longer just a player, she was the one holding the cards. As the silence stretched between them, Sarah's mind raced. She had uncovered so much, but there were still so many questions. Why had her mother disappeared? What had driven her to this dark world of manipulation and control? And what about Jason? Had he ever been sincere in his feelings for her, or had it all been an act from the start? These questions swirled in her mind, but the answer was clear: she had to keep moving forward. She couldn't undo the past, couldn't change the choices that had led her here, but she could shape what came next. With a deep breath, Sarah finally spoke, her voice steady, but carrying the weight of everything she had learned. "You want me to join you, to be a part of this world," she said, her eyes locked on her mother's. "But I'm not like you. I'll never be like you." Her mother's lips curled into a twisted smile, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "You don't have a choice," she replied, but there was a flicker of something, doubt, maybe, beneath her icy exterior. "You never did." In that instant, everything changed. The world around Sarah seemed to shift, as if the ground beneath her feet was suddenly unsteady. She was faced with a decision that would define everything: the end of one chapter, the beginning of another. Her father, her mother, Jason, the syndicate, they were all pieces of a game that had been in motion long before she ever stepped onto the stage. But now, Sarah understood that she could no longer be a spectator. She had to take control, even if that meant facing the darkness within her own family, even if that meant confronting the truth she had spent so long trying to deny. But just as she was about to make her choice, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message, a simple one, but it sent a chill down her spine. "They're watching." Sarah's blood ran cold as the implications of that message hit her. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Whoever they were, whoever had been pulling the strings, they were still out there, still watching. The game was far from finished. And Sarah had just become its most important piece. With a final, lingering glance at her parents, Sarah turned, stepping into the unknown. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with danger, lies, and hidden truths. But one thing was certain, she wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not ever. As she disappeared into the shadows, the world she had just uncovered seemed to pulse with life, its mysteries far from solved. And the audience, still holding their breath, was left to wonder, was this the end of Sarah's story, or just the beginning of something far darker?